Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the CEO Decisions with Kamila, the podcast for established service providers earning 100K who are ready to refine their business model and messaging for sustainable revenue growth without rebuilding everything from scratch. I'm your host, Kamila Brown Washington, business strategist and growth coach to high performing CEOs. We have the conversations that elevate your identity, strengthen your leadership, and position your brand for premium, profitable growth. Today, we're going to talk about why six-figure online entrepreneurs plateau before $1 million. So, there's a conversation circulating in the online business space right now that says if you've moved into high ticket offers, you need a messaging upgrade. And while there is truth in that statement, I want to offer a deeper perspective. Because in my experience working with established online entrepreneurs, messaging is rarely the root of the problem. Messaging is usually just a symptom. The real issue is, almost always the business model itself. Since 2019, I've worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs who crossed the 250 to 300K mark and began introducing higher ticket offers, private coaching, masterminds, VIP days, or premium group programs. They expected that raising their prices would automatically increase their revenue. But what often happens instead is something very different. Revenue plateaus, conversions slow down, marketing suddenly feels harder than it used to. So the natural conclusion becomes my messaging must not be strong enough. But messaging alone cannot fix a misaligned business model. And that specific distinction is really, really critical. They're actually making the shift from transactional buyers to sophisticated buyers. And when you move from selling lower ticket offers to high ticket programs, you're just changing the price of your offer. You know, that's not what you should be doing. It's not just changing the price. You're actually changing the type of buyer that you're attracting. And lower ticket buyers often make fast transactional decisions. Lower price products, have a much lower barrier to entry. There's usually no application or a sales call. Buyers simply decide whether they can afford the price and whether the outcome of the sales page matches the value being offered. They see a compelling sales page, they resonate with the outcome, and then they just click buy. However, when you notice or when you introduce higher ticket offers and continue marketing the same way, conversions often decline or simply plateau. So sophisticated buyers behave very differently. The issue is usually not the offer itself. The issue is that the messaging has not evolved alongside the business model. And many entrepreneurs continue using the same marketing style. They focus heavily on, education, teaching, and just proving their expertise and authority. When people invest in having access to you, they not only are buying into a result, they're also investing into your perspective, your leadership, your intellectual property. They're not just evaluating the information inside your program, they're also evaluating the entire ecosystem around it. They're also assessing, like I said, your leadership, your credibility, your decision-making framework, the proximity to, the level of business or how your business is actually established, as well as the caliber of the other clients or students or members, however you identify your people, but the caliber of the room that they're going to enter. So really, think about this. And this is why identity-based messaging has become such an important conversation. And when buyers invest at higher levels, they're not just buying content, they're buying access to your thinking, access to your perspective, access to the environment that you're going to curate. But even here, messaging is still not the entire story because sophisticated buyers are not only evaluating how you communicate, they're also evaluating how your business is structured. Okay. So let me just share, when I first began, to understand this concept around probably 2020, at that time, my business was at a critical inflection point. We had generated roughly 250 to 300,000 in revenue, and I was selling my signature program called Create a Profitable Charity. It was a $2,000 digital course with coaching components designed for nonprofit founders who wanted to build a revenue generating business model to sustain their mission. Like many entrepreneurs at that stage, I believe the next level of growth would come from optimizing my funnel. So I invested $20,000 in a program that taught automated marketing strategies. I built the automated, webinar. I created the evergreen email sequence. I hired a Facebook ads manager. I followed the process step by step exactly as it was taught. But after 3 months into implementing that strategy, I had a major realization. Even at the $2,000 price point, prospects still wanted human interaction. Many of them were, willing to pay an additional $1,000 upgrade just for a private one-on-one session with me, bringing their total investment to $3,000. So, yes, many clients still, purchase through the automated funnel. However, there was a noticeable resistance and friction in the buying decision for a significant portion of my audience at that time. And over time, I began to understand why. The nonprofit sector operates from a very different mindset. Many grassroots nonprofit founders are accustomed to grants, fundraising, discounted services, and subsidized support. They often, do not initially understand that nonprofit is a tax status, not a business model. And because of that, there was always a constant process of having to shift their thinking. Every client required a mindset transition from operating like a grant funded organization to operating like, a for profit business with a social cause. And while the program was successful, we eventually grew the business to about 750K in revenue by the fourth quarter of 2020. So I started at around 250, 300, and by the end of the fourth quarter of 2020, we're at about 750K. But we're still having to rewire the mindset with nearly every client, which really became exhausting. And it wasn't fun anymore. It wasn't the work itself that drained me. It was the constant, starting over with the mindset change, and having that conversation with every single client. So I began studying what other entrepreneurs inside that same coaching program that I was in, what they were actually doing. And there were about 20 of us in this particular mastermind. And I started noticing a very clear distinction. The entrepreneurs who were, like a million plus in annual revenue with fully automated funnels were not just selling, lower price offers under $1,000. Their audience was also much broader. Like they were actually just marketing to business owners in general. Meanwhile, those of us selling programs priced between 2,000 and 5,000 really struggled to replicate that same funnel performance. And that observation led to a breakthrough for me. I realized that once you reach, a 2,000, 5,000, $10,000 price range, the buyer psychology begins to change dramatically. But price wasn't the only factor. The sophistication of the buyer's business model also mattered. People apply much more discernment when evaluating higher ticket offers. The decision process for a $200 digital product is fundamentally different from the decision process for a $5,000 coaching program. And in the nonprofit space, the difference was even more, pronounced because many organizations were conditioned to expect discounts, reduced pricing, or free support. And that wasn't about to happen, you know? So after about, I don't know, I end up probably around 2024 to like June of 2025, I took an 18-month sabbatical. I had just another realization that, I was just getting burnt out. I was getting burnt out on the rinse and repeat of having to change the mindset of that particular, audience. And I no longer wanted to build, the next phase of my business around that startup buyer profile. I just didn't want to do startup anymore. So that insight really helped me understand something much more deeper. Your business model and your marketing strategy must evolve alongside your pricing and the offer structure. Otherwise, friction will always show up, somewhere in the sales process. So when your revenue plateaus, you must understand the business model differences. And over the years, I've invested well over six figures into coaching programs, masterminds, and strategic advisories. I have studied nearly every marketing strategy circulating in the online education industry. But there's one thing that very few people explain clearly. And what I want you to do is hear me clearly and really lean in to what I'm about to say. Write this down. Most people do not explain when certain marketing funnels actually work and which business models they're actually designed to support. And this is very, very, very critical because every marketing funnel is not for every business model. And they're not breaking that down to you, and they're not making it clear. Or maybe, us as the audience or, clients, we're not asking the right questions before we make that type of investment. And when your business is built around intellectual property and close client relationships, your marketing strategy must reflect that specific structure. Relationship driven businesses operate very differently from high volume digital course businesses. In proximity based models, there is closer access between the coach and the client. There's also far more intimacy in the investment decision. Another major difference is operational structure. And many entrepreneurs running large scale funnels are spending $50,000 or more per month on paid advertising because it's about a numbers game. Like they're just trying to get the numbers. The most I've ever scaled my advertising budget was around $20,000 a month. And that's $240,000 a year. 240,000 a year just for advertising. That's one line item. That doesn't include, salaries that I have to pay, vendors and the contractors, just advertising. And, quite frankly, I eventually got tired and a little resentful for, contributing to making Mark Zuckerberg like wealthier while I was trying to build my own wealth. Like those businesses are often designed to operate like content media companies or influencer, type brand. And that's never been my approach. Like I'm not an influencer. That is not my goal. That is not my ambition. My business has always been built around profitability, sustainability, and lifestyle design. I prioritize long-term client relationships. And my focus is on lifetime client value and retention, not just volume. It's not like a cattle call for me. I'm just not trying to get them in and get them out. And I prefer working with niche audiences, solving specialized problems rather than like broad audiences buying generalized information. And once I clearly understood those differences, I really was in a better position to make a critical shift. And I adjusted my business model first, then aligned my marketing strategy, which ultimately allowed me to accelerate profitable revenue growth. So, in other words, I focused on the model, the marketing, and the money. When those elements are aligned, growth becomes far more sustainable and far less exhausting. And that adjustment created significant growth for me. So, what I know to be true is messaging cannot compensate for strategic misalignment. One of the biggest mistakes I see in the online education space is entrepreneurs attempting to solve strategic problems with tactical solutions. They try to fix declining conversions by producing more content, refining copy, running new challenges, building new funnels. But if the underlying business model lacks clarity, no amount of messaging will compensate for it. Your messaging can only amplify what already exists. It cannot manufacture strategic alignment. Let me give you an example. Many entrepreneurs say they sell high ticket offers, but their marketing ecosystem is still built for low ticket volume. Their content strategy, resembles that of an influencer, and their funnels resemble that of a digital course creator. Their audience size requires massive reach to sustain revenue. Like it's a volume game, it's a numbers game. And yet their offer requires deep proximity. Those two models are fundamentally different. The real conversation is like defining or refining what is the business model. And then based on your business model, let's create aligned marketing so you can attract the audience that your specific knowledge, expertise and authority is going to help solve whatever problem that, that specific audience has. Like there has to be alignment. Like they have to know you, like you, trust you, believe in your values, believe in how your business is structured, how you produce the outcome or the promise or the result that they're looking for. So all of that is really a part of how you're going to market to that level of buyer. What type of sophistication do you have to upgrade and implement to help them with their buying decision? If you're buying, if you're buying a Hyundai versus a Tesla, your your buying decision is going to be different. You're going to ask completely different questions based on the investment. And so the same is with your program. Once you define and refine your model and you're able to elevate the level of sophistication with your marketing, then the money is inevitable. It's just going to come. So before we really talk about messaging, we have to talk about structure. As I work with established online entrepreneurs with my proprietary framework, which is the profitable blueprint, we start with the same sequence: refining your business model first, then aligning your marketing strategy to accelerate profitable revenue growth. Again, model, marketing, money, not the other way around. Your business model defines who you serve, how you deliver your transformation, how many clients you can realistically support, what proximity actually looks like. You know, you can only do so many one-on-one, clients because you're one person and you have other responsibilities, you know? So that's going to limit you. And at that point, you really have to determine, is that the business model that I want to continue operating in? And if you do, that's fine. But understand that eventually there's going to become a ceiling because again, there's so many hours in the day. You have obligations to your family, to your community, if you're involved in your community, children, husband, maybe you're a caregiver for your parents. There's other aspects of your life. This is what you do, but this isn't necessarily who you are. So there's going to be a ceiling. If that's your business model, fine. But maybe you might consider refining or, letting that business model evolve into something else, right? So again, once the structure is clear, then marketing becomes easier because now your messaging reflects a system that already makes sense. But when entrepreneurs skip that step, messaging becomes a constant struggle. They feel like, they're always optimizing their content. But the real issue is that the architecture of the business was never designed for the offer that they're trying to sell. I'm going to let that sink in for a minute, okay? The architecture of the business was never designed for the offer that they're trying to sell. You only have so much capacity. So doing one-on-ones are fine, but maybe it's time to elevate to a group program, or maybe it's time to elevate to a membership. Like you really need to assess and start thinking about, how am I going to build more capacity for me, yet still serve my clients and make sure that they're getting the outcome and the result that they're looking for without being burnt out and being overwhelmed because ultimately you're in business to make money. And if you're at a plateau, like you're just like you're not growing. You're not, falling back and, losing money, but you're just there. And so you have to make that type of decision. Like, do I want to stay where I am or do I want to continue to elevate and grow and scale and expand? Okay. Now, let me catch my breath. Let me be crystal clear. Identity absolutely matters. In proximity-based businesses, buyers are evaluating the person leading the room. They want to understand how you think, how you make decisions, what values guide your leadership. But identity is most powerful when it's supported by structural alignment, because identity without structure becomes personal branding. And personal branding alone does not build a scalable business. What actually builds sustainable revenue is the combination of strategic clarity, aligned positioning, disciplined leadership, and a business model designed for the level you want to operate at. If your business has plateaued at six figures or even multiple six figures, the question is not simply, how can I improve my messaging? The deeper question is, does my business model support the level of leadership, proximity, and revenue I'm trying to create? Because when those elements are aligned, messaging becomes far simpler. You are no longer trying to convince people. You are articulating something that already makes sense. And that distinction changes everything. So the bottom line is messaging upgrades are helpful, but messaging alone will never solve a structural problem. If your offer has evolved, but your revenue hasn't, the work is not just refining what you say. The work is refining how the entire business is going to operate. Because sustainable growth doesn't come from louder marketing, it comes from strategic alignment. And when your model, marketing, and leadership are aligned, your messaging no longer has to work so hard. It simply reflects the clarity again that already exists. So, thank you for joining and for listening today. If today's conversation resonated with you, please share it with the CEO within your intimate circle, someone who's ready for their next level of clarity and alignment. Your profitable success begins with intentional CEO decisions. I invite you to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It really helps other CEOs discover these types of conversations and, make the decisions to elevate their revenue growth. So if you're ready for us to work together, please click the link in my show notes to apply or join my waitlist. Okay? I look forward to seeing you and working with you. Let's continue the conversation. By all means, send me a DM on Instagram or Facebook. Talk to you later. Bye bye.